Hi everybody. Again, Daniel Oppenheimer for the recording, Land Program Director, Hill Country Alliance, and look at this beautiful map of the Texas Hill Country. This is a map we love to show at HCA because it delineates the Hill Country as we define it. And if you look at those purple lines, we define it based on those iconic surface and groundwater resources that make this the remarkable place we know and love. And so it encompasses about 17 counties and about 10 million acres. And that's enough to keep us pretty busy 5 days a week. I meant to touch on there was a reference earlier to ecoregions, because we are sort of at the confluence of 7 different ecological regions. We've got the Trans-Pecos to the west, the South Texas brush country to the south, the Blackland Prairie to the east, and all sorts of savanna and prairies coming down from the north. We have incredible diversity. Some of the statistics were put up earlier for the state of Texas. And you want to know how many native fish species we have just in the Texas Hill Country? Any guesses? Fish, native fish. We've got 54 species of native fish just in the Texas Hill Country. What about grasses, native grasses in the Hill Country? Go bigger. Yes, over 200, and we've got over 400 bird species that reside or pass through the Hill Country. So this is a remarkably diverse place. It's also a place that is experiencing a tremendous amount of growth. And so the Hill Country Alliance and a number of our partners in what's called the Hill Country Conservation Network did an assessment to actually put numbers to it. What is going on across the Hill Country? And so we quantified the amount of growth. This is not the growth across each county. This is the growth in the unincorporated portions of these Hill Country counties, where counties have limited tools, authority, and resources to manage growth. So for friends here in Kerr County, y'all grew 55% in a 30-year time horizon, which is considerable, but that is peanuts compared to places like Bandera, Kendall, and Comal and Hayes counties. We're seeing tremendous growth across the region. And so tonight, I'm going to focus on a few things we can do as land owners or folks who have access to land as master naturalists. We help manage parks and natural areas. And so tonight, I'm just going to focus on what we can do as individuals connected to the land. Quick outline of what I hope I will stick to this evening. First, we're going to talk about land stewardship. What is it? Then we're going to get into a few tools and practices and resources. Some of this stuff you may already know, but I suspect some of it will be new. So we'll sort of meander and cover a few different topics. And then I've asked to be stopped mid-sentence, 10 minutes till, to make sure we have plenty of time for discussion. So, land stewardship. That term is thrown around all over the place. I'm sure many of us use that term when we come to events like this, but we never really define it, do we? So I'm curious, when y'all think of the term land stewardship, what does that mean? For the folks on Zoom, the response was take care of the land. I think that's an excellent answer. What else? Yes, ma'am. Sustainability. Yes. What else? Best practices. Yeah. So we want to take care of the land using best practices and thinking in a sustainable manner. That, y'all, is pretty darn good. Paula, by the way, making sure you saw that. Yep. Okay. So yeah, anybody here had the good fortune to meet Steve Nelly? All right. So Steve worked for the Natural Resources Conservation Service for about 48, 49 years. He has worked with thousands of landowners uh, across the entire state of Texas, and he's thought a lot about land stewardship, what that means. And here's what Steve says. Um, Land stewardship is fundamentally a connection to and an understanding of the land. It's when a landowner is grafted into the land and the land grafted to them. And so to expand on that and connect it to what y'all said, it's through that connection and that understanding that we can be good caretakers, think about how to use best practices, and to manage the land sustainably. But I started the presentation very intentionally on this slide because so often there's a temptation to roll our sleeves up and get dirty. We want to go, kill a weed or plant this or seed that, whatever it is. There's always this temptation to want to do. But it's really important to first think about where and how we can connect to and deepen our understanding of our land. Because as the private landowner, you understand your property better than anyone else. And so that's where I wanted to start tonight. I'm going to make it a little conversational for a moment. For those, I hope a few folks will raise their hand. Does this definition resonate? Does this sound about right? Cool. I'd love maybe one or two folks to raise your hand. How do you or how have you sought to connect with the land? What does that mean and look like for maybe one or two of you? I can share what I do, but I want to hear from y'all more. Yes, ma'am. Planting native plants. That is such a good feeling to do that. Anybody else? One or two folks? Yeah, so it's not just the plant native plants, but careful, sustained observation. Who's coming to visit those plants? Are you getting pollinators? Who's coming? Yeah. One thing that I love to do that's helped me, I think, understand land better than most things is I love to walk the land, assuming there's not a ton of lightning. I walk the land while it's raining. And once I can understand where and how the water is flowing, that helps me immensely understand what's happening and how the land is functioning. But we'll get to that later. Thanks to those who volunteered. So again, y'all already touched on this. When we're connecting to and understanding the land, we want to do so in a sustainable manner using best management practices so that we are creating or sustaining a healthy and functioning landscape. Um, is it fair to pick on the new class a little bit? So for our new class, why is it important to manage for a healthy landscape? What would a healthy, functioning landscape do for us? Why should we care? And it's not a trick question, I promise. Mm, I like that. So once you've got things into a pretty functioning state, yeah, less sweat equity needed. Yeah, kind of going into a lighter maintenance mode. Mm. That was a lot of good answers. So yeah, there's a whole host of reasons. Whatever your values might be or your objectives for the land, we all benefit when it is healthy and functioning. Someone mentioned here habitat, so we can grow palatable plants as food and for habitat for wildlife, forage for livestock. When we have a landscape like the one in this picture, what do you think is going to happen if we got 1, 2, 3 inches of rain? Is that going to race off that landscape? No, we've got these beautiful eastern gamma grasses, all sorts of forbs and shrubs and trees. It's going to act like a sponge and it's going to absorb all that water and dissipate the energy. And when, of course, when we slow down and soak up water, we're mitigating flash flooding, living in flash flood alley. That is existentially important. We're also trapping sediment and keeping our sediment where it is. To say that more plainly, land in the hill country is dang expensive. And so you're keeping your property there and not letting it go downhill or downstream. Um, we'll talk about erosion later. Again, just like a sponge, we're soaking up that water, storing it in the land, and hopefully the soil is healthy enough to where we are recharging our aquifers. And when we do that, of course, our aquifers feed our creeks and rivers through springs, and we have functioning, iconic hill country rivers too. So there are all sorts of compelling reasons why we seek as stewards to work towards and sustain healthy, functioning landscapes. So my hope for today, we're gonna cover a few things, and it may or may not come off in a fluid fashion, but I hope you'll learn a tidbit or two tonight. I think that's a reasonable expectation. And my hope is that tomorrow or whenever you've got some time free, you'll walk your property, or if it's a park that you help steward, you'll walk it and look at it perhaps with a new set of eyes and see things a little differently. But what I don't want you to do is fall into that trap of do. I want you to spend time and just connect to and understand and appreciate that land. And think about your goals and objectives. All right, can we come back to the new class? Is that okay? Tell me when that gets old. Um, why why did Ricky Lennox have such powerful words about bare ground? He said, "A raindrop hitting bare soil is like a small bomb." What's wrong with a bunch of bare ground? Yeah, it's very susceptible to erosion. That's exactly right. And so we've got a great picture on the left of a close-up shot of what happens with bare exposed soil getting hit by rain. And then has anyone ever seen one of these simulations on the right before? Um, if you can't see what's happening on the far left, where the left yellow arrow is, we've got a small uh, plot of essentially bare soil. And so we've got a rainwater simulation, water's coming down, and when it's striking that bare ground, just like on the left, it's acting like a bomb, and that soil is just erupting and racing off the pan. And you can see in the barrel, maybe you can, maybe you can't, the barrel right here, there's a tremendous amount of water carrying a tremendous amount of soil. And so each treatment as you move to the right shifts one or two variables. And then to the far right, you have a treatment with a tremendous diversity and abundance of grasses. And so correspondingly, what can y'all see in that, in the catchment? Oh, this is not good over here. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there's very little water. And what else? Very little dirt. That's right. So we're catching and absorbing that water and we're holding on to our soil, aka keeping our property where it is. So that's a good starting place. We want to think about where do we have bare ground and why? And then we want to think about to what extent can we enhance soil health and reduce that bare ground. And there's a great set of guiding principles that can help inform how we do this. One of the first principles is we want to reduce physical and chemical disturbance. Keyword reduce, not eliminate. We still need to live on and actively manage the land for any number of reasons. But to the extent that we can reduce the disturbance of the soil, we can improve its health. Any idea why that matters? Why should we care about if and how we're disturbing the soil? Isn't it just a bunch of just dirt beneath our feet? You're shaking your head. Yeah, that's right. There's all sorts of living organisms right beneath our feet. In a single teaspoon, millions and millions of bacteria and fungi that are connecting to those roots and helping sustain this remarkably complex system that, frankly, we're barely starting to understand. And so, yeah, we want to not just focus on those native plants, but the organisms beneath our feet that are connecting to those roots and helping exchange carbon sugars for water, nutrients, and other important substances. Maximizing soil cover, that comes back to reducing bare ground. How can we armor or cover the soil? Sure, with plants. What else? What if you missed the plant sale? Yeah, we can use mulch. We can use all sorts of organic matter. You can go steal your neighbor's bags of leaves that are sitting on the sidewalk. Any organic matter that you can put down on the ground is probably going to be better than, well, yeah, better susceptible soil that's just waiting to be eroded. Increasing biodiversity. Why does biodiversity matter in the context of soil health? Sure. Yeah. With greater diversity, we might be more resistant to certain diseases. And then I didn't quite catch what you said at the tail end. Healthier environments. Can you go on maybe one more step? Where and how does it provide additional health and vigor? Go. Yeah. So just as we focus on ecosystems above the ground, absolutely. There's a whole ecosystem that's connected and beneath the ground as well. And so if we have, say, warm and cool season plants growing, then we have plants that are actively working through photosynthesis, transferring that sunlight into carbon, feeding that whole array of organisms throughout the year through various kinds and shapes of roots. And so, yes, we're feeding that system. And I guess I just skipped to number four. Again, that photosynthesis, that conversion of sunlight to carbon sugar is feeding that whole system beneath our feet, which is really helping us create these aggregates of soil so that the soil is more stable and absorbing more water. What about integrating animals? I think y'all have Taylor Collins, who's going to be coming in a few months, and he's going to have a whole presentation just on number five. Um, why and how might we want to integrate animals to enhance soil health? Yeah, manure, organic matter. What else? Mm. T- Tell us a little bit more. How does having that intensive grazing management accelerate things? Yes. So livestock, whether that's cattle, sheep, goats, chickens, pigs, they're all being used in the hill country. Yeah, can be a great tool. They can add inputs, urine and manure. Their hoof action can be a certain type of disturbance to help accelerate the recovery of our rangelands. And yes, we want to make sure that we're giving the land enough time to rest and recover. And that's a true art form to do that right. And if we do it just right, we've got, I don't know, maybe 55-ish people in the room, plus or minus. If we all own 1 acre of land and we incorporated those soil health principles to improve our soil health by 1%, anyone good at math? 25,000 times 55, whatever that is, that's a big number in terms of the amount of water that we could capture and store on the land, enhancing our aquifers, our springs, our creeks, and our rivers. So whether you know, you own or you help take care of a half acre, an acre, a park, even if you've just got a tiny little patch of green, it all adds up if we can incorporate those soil health principles, connecting to and understanding the land. Does that make sense? All right. Any questions on Zoom before I change wavelengths? All right. Can you tell if they're still awake? Okay, good. So I'm going to transition a bit. This really starts to get into the materials I think I passed out to everybody. We're going to talk a little bit about erosion. There's different kinds of erosion. Anyone ever seen this image before? It's kind of full disclosure, the type of thing I would have seen in like a fifth grade textbook and just sort of flipped past it. But this is really important. Oh yeah, I got to stay on this side. Right. Oh, and I got a pointer. Well, now we're getting high tech. Ooh, look at that, folks. So we're going to start at the top of the hill, okay? How many folks here have the healthiest, best soil with 0% bare ground on your property? No, none of us do. In part, that's because of history, in part because of the geology. There's all sorts of reasons. But oftentimes we can have a part of our property, especially on the top of the hill. Here we go. That might be compacted. It might be compacted because of how we sited or designed a road, maybe historic grazing, any number of things. But when the land is compacted, which is to say you don't have that healthy functioning soil ecosystem beneath your feet, water is not going to soak into that ground. And so it is going to uniformly, like a sheet, start to flow downhill. Does that make sense? And at first, that's okay. It's kind of going at an even flow down the hill, but then what happens? The hill gets steeper. And that water goes from sheet flow, this uniform, gentle flow, and it starts merging together. We don't use this term in Texas very often, but that water goes from this even sheet flow to forming rills. And a rill is a fancy way of saying sort of a really teeny tiny gully, like maybe just an inch, 2 inches, 3 inches deep. And you might think, so what? It's just that big, right? But if we are not slowing and sinking the water at that point, then what happens? Things can go from bad to ugly. And yeah, we can get deep gullies, 1 foot, 2 foot, 3 foot, 5 foot. I lived in Gillespie County and we had, oh my gosh, a 12-foot deep gully where I lived. So this can get pretty darn serious. And I can tell you, it's a heck of a lot cheaper. Someone talked about sweat equity and When your land is healthy and functioning, that means you don't have to work as hard. Yeah, if you can stop erosion at the sheet or the rill level, that's going to save you a ton of work. Once things turn into a gully, it's tough work to fix something. So, again, think back to that first raindrop picture we saw a few minutes ago. We can have splash erosion hitting that bare ground, then this uniform sheet flow, and then we start to go down that hill, and things go from a rill just a couple of inches deep to a gully that can be 2, 3, 4, 5, 10 feet deep. So, what do we do about that? We talked earlier about some strategies. You can seed and plant some native grasses. We talked about changing grazing management. There's a ton of things we can do as land stewards, and I am just barely going to scratch the surface on just a few additional ideas tonight. And we can take the conversation wherever y'all want to go from here. So this is a moderate hillside in Gillespie County where a landowner was having some erosion issues and was wondering what to do. And perhaps the easiest thing that he was already doing was when this tree fell down, guess what he did? He left it in place. That cost him $0, and he spent no time having to do that. So there's some things that are so simple and so easy, but are important to acknowledge. Then we're going to go just sort of a little bit tougher, a little bit tougher, a little bit tougher. Rows of rocks. Has anyone tried this? Putting rows of rocks along your hillside. Yeah. So this is a property out in Bandera County. It's actually featured very prominently in your hillside stewardship guide. This was Bear Caliche. This was Bear Caliche baking in the Texas heat for years and years and years. And this landowner, she went out with a heavy duty rake one day, and you can see the baseball cap there for size. And she just took this heavy duty rake and rode together or put together about 3 or 4 rows of rocks on her hillside. Now, I'm not saying this is perfect, but this has gone from bare, scorching hot caliche to there's probably 2 or 3 different native bunchgrass species in this picture in Forbes. This caliche hillside is on its way to recovering just because they started to slow and sink the water. Why does that matter? Yes, ma'am. Yeah. Yes and no. Um, oh, sorry, repeat the question. Repeat the question. So the question was if the land was, I'm gonna put it in my own words. If the land was 100% healthy and functioning and acting like the strongest sponge in the world and absorbing every drop of rain so that there was no runoff, what would happen to our creeks and rivers? Would they not get as much water? It's actually a really complicated question, but the easier answer is that certainly in the hour, 2 hours, 3 hours, 4 hours after that rain event, yeah, they would receive significantly less water, not only from the land, but our storm drainage, and yeah, there would be a lot less water going into those creeks and rivers, in the hours that follow. Um, but all of our hill country creeks and rivers are sustained by base flows. And again, that goes back to the connection between surface and groundwater. And so if our land is acting like a sponge, it's absorbing more water. That water is percolating into our aquifers, and then it's ultimately emerging back onto the surface through springs, which over time are going to feed those creeks and rivers so that they are flowing longer during drought. So would a creek and river get less water, on the scale of hours after a rain event? Yes. But if we can absorb that water into the soil, into our aquifers, it's going to sustain that base flow for a much, much longer time. And sorry, Yes, please remind me to repeat the question. Um, okay, so we're talking about rows of rocks and what happens when we slow and sink water. What's magical about that? Why? Why do things start growing? What's the magic in slowing and sinking water? Yes. So that water, as it's rolling down the hill, is picking up and carrying sediment, aka your land, your property. It's being carried away. But if we can slow and sink that water, it's going to drop. And if enough of that deposits, we can get enough soil so that those native plants can either start to grow on their own over time, or if we want to accelerate things, we can broadcast seed. But yeah, slowing and sinking water is going to catch that sediment and going to enhance soil moisture to create those enabling conditions for our native plants to start to establish. That's when good things start to happen. Does that make sense? All right. So we're just going to get tougher from here, folks. So this was, again, a heavy duty rock and just casually going out for a couple hours and making a few rows on the hillside, and magic started to happen. All right. Same landowner, Bandera County. This was after doing some selective removal of ash juniper, aka mountain cedar. And instead of just piling it and burning it, they use that wood as a resource. I mean, it's already on your property. There's a reason that people have built corrals and fence posts and all sorts of remarkable infrastructure out of ash juniper. It is a very resilient wood. And so, what she do instead of just piling it and burning it, she and her husband created three different rows of these logs, and they followed the contours of the hillside. This was yet again another bare, caliche, burning hot hillside in Bandera County, and they started to slow and sink the water, trapping sediment, increasing soil moisture. And look at that. Look at all those native grasses that have started to establish just by slowing and sinking the water. And these are the contour lines, and we'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. Um, we talked about mulch earlier. Mulch is a great way to reduce bare ground and to stabilize the site. When you're using mulch, especially cedar slash, it's really important not to go 1 or 2, maybe 3 inches deep. If you go deeper than that, you're really going to impede the germination of plants. It's going to take a long time for those grasses to break through. Again, ash juniper is a really resilient wood. So mulch is great. Just don't overdo it. 1 or 2, maybe 3 inches, and you're going to protect that soil and cool it off immensely. Yes, ma'am. There's some nuance that it's okay. Sorry. Yes, repeat the question. There was a question about oak wilt and when it's safe to mulch the wood. And I'll be honest, I cannot remember. It's been too many years since I was in a master naturalist class. Someone in here, if you know, but I can't remember the nuance between a red oak and a white oak and when it's safe. But there definitely is a time when it is safe to use that wood, whether as logs on contour or mulch. I just can't remember this evening. Um, yeah, where and how you might potentially be spreading a vector. If anyone knows, we got a bunch of smart people in here. Um, long time. But yeah, I would talk if you have a lot of oak wilt wood on your property, you should talk to the Texas A&M Forest Service. It's pretty easy. You can Texas A&M Forest Service and type in find my forester, and that would be a great question for them, and they could talk you through that. Great question. But yeah, if it's already on your property, man, yeah, go for it. But yeah, talk to the Forest Service first, and then they say yes, go for it. Um, so who's ever seen a topographic map before? All right. So I mentioned contour lines earlier. Now, if you don't have a contour map or a laser level, which is the device on the right, it can be tough to really figure out those nuanced contour lines on your land. Um, and something is better than nothing. If you can get a few rows of rocks or logs on the land, that's better than nothing. But if you can really start to follow the topography and those contour lines, you're going to dramatically increase the effectiveness of those erosion control strategies. And in that guide that I've shared with you, there are some great links, I think, on the back page on really cool mapping resources. You can look up your own property to start to study the contour lines. All right. So, how many folks kind of went to sleep on the simple stuff because you've been there, you've done that? That's all old news. Okay. I'm just going to touch on the advanced stuff. It's already what, like 7:45 at night, 7:38. I'm just going to touch on the complicated stuff. It's too late to get too technical. But I just want to acknowledge that there are a lot more novel and sophisticated strategies that exist to slow and sink water. But before I do that, I want y'all to guess. Um, Anyone know what that feature is called on the left? What that feature on the landscape looks like when suddenly, not quite, although it could theoretically be one. That's called a head cut. Head cuts can be 2 inches, 5 inches, 5 feet. A head cut is when there is a dramatic drop in the elevation on a hillside. And some scary things can happen when you have a head cut because the way that water rolls and bites down on the land, it can essentially downcut and form a gully, but it can also chew away at the lip and cut up the hill as well. I didn't put an image in my presentation tonight, but head cuts really warrant our attention. So that is a huge head cut. That I think at the bottom is about, I don't know, 5 feet deep. Anyone want to guess what stressor on the land caused such a huge head cut? Oh my gosh, I forgot. This gentleman has been to one of our workshops. So I was going to say that's a heck of a guess. But yes, you would never believe it. But at this ranch in Gillespie County, that huge 5 foot head cut, that giant gully, was formed by a little wildlife game trail formed by axis deer. That's only about that wide. You would never, ever believe it. But yeah, the more we study our land and start to put the pieces together, we can understand how it functions and we can start to manage it more effectively. So, yeah, this is a terribly advanced stair step erosion control structure that I can't even begin to explain. But in essence, it is stabilizing that feature. So, the next time we get a 3, 4, 5 inch rain, that feature is stabilized. It is not going to downcut or rip up closer and closer to that fence line. So there are really advanced and expensive ways we can slow and sink water, and then there are the simple ones as well. So these are just a few pictures. This is a whole other presentation, but I just wanted to give you a taste for the types of solutions that are out there for slowing and sinking water. On the left, this was a head cut, not 5 feet deep, maybe only about 3 feet deep. And the landowner created something called a rock run down. And that's in your guide. You can read all about rock rundowns and how you can carefully sculpt these. This is not willy-nilly taking an excavator with a bunch of rock and just willy-nilly dumping it. There's a lot of thought and intention that goes into each of these structures. And so the one on the left is called a rock rundown, and that's one way to stabilize a head cut. Besides our friends who have been to the Hillside Stewardship Workshop, who's ever heard of a media luna? All right, so media luna, a half moon, or I like to call it a smiley face in the middle. It's really hard to tell in the picture, but there's a very subtle channel where water's starting to concentrate and form one of those rills. Again, a rill, remember, it's sort of like a shallow gully. And so this property in Bandera County, the water is starting to channelize and cut into the land. And rather than letting it continue to channelize and cut, they have put this media luna in this place where it is going to take that channelized water, and that thing's going to fill up like a bowl. And on the downhill side, it's going to redistribute. But the arrows, the flow is going out every which direction instead of in a single channel. Again, in that hillside stewardship guide, and yes, I'm being a salesman and encouraging you to read and share that guide. Finally, on the right, we have berms and swales, which are a way to trap a tremendous amount of water, which isn't always necessary. But in this case, these landowners had tremendous amounts of water coming off of a county road, just tons. And so they actually put in a series of berms and swales. And if you don't have a ton of runoff and the hill isn't that steep, these are pretty low risk. But if you're working on a steep slope and you've got a ton of drainage, there can be a lot of risk in disturbing the land like this. And so again, these are more advanced strategies. You need to put a lot of time and research and potentially expertise into doing these right. Yes. Yes. So, oh yeah, I've got a pointer. I forget. Technology. Yes. Repeat the question. Which way is the water running? Um, so hold on, bear with me. All right. So up where these folks are, this is the uphill side. There's actually a house in the county road that I referenced. This is the same pasture. The water is pouring off this county road and coming down this way. And so what happens is there is a very subtle channel. You can kind of see it in here, but the water is going to come down here. It's going to fill up in this bowl. And then instead of coming out just like it's coming down, zip, and cutting into the land, it's going to slow down through these rocks. And then some of it's going to go out that way, some of it that way, some that way. And it's going to redistribute that pasture, which is becoming drier because the flow of water is starting to get concentrated. So that's slowing and redistributing water across their pasture. Good question. 5 minutes. All right. Oh gosh, y'all. I'm gonna skip like a whole section, okay? Because I really want us to have a good Q&A. So again, the Hillside Stewardship Guide, you've got a hard copy. There's also an online version on our website. We're super excited. This is years in the making. Not only do we have photographs, we've got really great visuals as well and explanations for how to think through and build these structures. So hope you enjoy it. Let us know if you have any questions. Now I'm gonna just speed through. I'm just gonna zip right through the next one. And if you have questions, we can go through this stuff at the end. But I just wanted to talk about invasive plants again with the stewardship theme of connecting and understanding the land. So just like with slowing and sinking water, we need to understand where and how the water is flowing across our property. If there's bare ground, why is it bare? Are there things we're doing today or things historically to disturb the soil? So similarly with invasive species, there's a temptation to do, or kill, or pull. But similarly, we need to pause and think about, what's there, what are they, how did they get here? And I'm just going to speed through this. For the new class, if you haven't learned about invasive species, I promise you will learn about them. Can I promise that? I can promise that. You're going to learn about non-native invasive species. We've got plenty of them in the hill country, but again, we're running out of time and I'm just going to skip through this. But there's all sorts of compelling reasons why we should care about invasive species, whatever your values. They could be ecological, agricultural, social, economic, plenty of reasons to be concerned with them. But again, you want to do it with a stewardship framework. You want to be thinking about your connection to and your understanding of the land. And so you want to ask questions like, well, why the heck do I have a bunch of invasive species here? And why over there? And you don't want to just have a gut reaction. You want to be really thoughtful about where and how you're managing them. And so this is this isn't even a laundry list. This is just scratching the surface of some of the invasive species y'all have in this part of the hill country. And we don't have time to go through them, but I'll show you some cute pictures. So integrated pest management, this is the idea of, being really thoughtful, understanding all the tools in your toolkit. Someone at the very beginning talked about best management practices. Well, that's where this comes in. You don't just want to start knocking stuff down. There are thoughtful, safe, and effective ways to control invasive plants, and then there are ways to just make them mad. So we want to be really thoughtful about where and how we're controlling them. We also want to have really good plant identification. If you're trying to control a Chinaberry tree, make sure it's a Chinaberry tree and not your native soapberry. And so again, there's a lot of thought and due diligence that goes into this work, but I am just going to zoom through this. I think y'all get the slides. So you can follow up if you've got questions. How many folks have had to fight this delightful multi-star thistle? See some hands. Great resource from Native American Seed. This is a plant that you want to detect when it's in a basal rosette, which is a fancy way of saying just sort of that flat green thing on the ground that you see in the wintertime. And this is a great resource that shows you, sorry, I'm staying on this side. That multi-star thistle has a much rounder lobe or leaf tip than your native wildflowers. And to the extent possible, you want to start targeting those in their early growth development. And again, you want to make sure, first step is make sure it's what you think it is. And again, lots of ways to treat it. How many folks have seen this on the Guadalupe River? Yeah, Arundodonax. Again, there are ways to effectively, safely treat this plant, and then there are ways to just make it angry. And so we've got a project on the Guadalupe. It's the Upper Guadalupe River Authority, but a project all across the hill country in about, 4 watersheds, working with volunteering landowners to treat this non-native invasive species. But again, good intentions are not enough. We need to connect with and understand the land and the resources. Can anyone tell what invasive species is on the left? We've already seen it tonight. You got it. So this was most likely one Chinaberry tree at one point. And with good intentions and anger, lots of anger towards an invasive plant, what happened was this was not controlled using best management practices or integrated pest management. And so it went from one Chinaberry to a whole bunch of Chinaberries. Similarly, on the right, it's hard to tell, but this is that Arundodonax, that bamboo-looking plant. You can see it dead over here because it was ultimately treated in the right way. But before that happened, guess what? Someone came in and just mowed it to heck. And instead of one arundo, we've got arundo propagules all over that property. So again, good intentions, not enough. We need to connect with and understand the land and the resources to really be good caretakers. Let's see. Oh yeah, lots more. And when we're thinking about integrated pest management, our goal should not just be kill the bad stuff, plant the good stuff. Controlling invasive species is something you want to do with your goals in mind. If you had nothing but, say, an invasive grass on your property and you killed all of it at once and you had a bunch of bare ground and a 4-inch rain, you were successful at maybe killing that invasive species, but you may have set back the overall health and function of your land. So you want to be really thoughtful, again, keeping your goals in mind, where and how you safely and effectively manage invasive species. This is a great quote I love at the bottom from Nicole Masters. She wrote a book called For the Love of Soil. She comes at weeds or invasive species from a slightly different perspective. She says, I rejoice in people's weeds as they offer clues and insights into soil health and management. And this all equates to opportunity. All right, we're getting to time. What does that mean? It means the land is telling us a story, and it's our job to connect with and understand what's happening on the landscape. So, resources for invasive species, a few key takeaways. Again, don't just jump into the trap of do. Think about where and how you're connecting to and understanding and taking care of the land. Do it in line with your goals, not your neighbor's goals or someone else's goals. It's your property, your goals. And if you need help, you've got a whole bunch of great folks willing and wanting to help. Uh, yeah, I think that's it. So yeah, hopefully you learned a tidbit or two. How about that? We got 10 minutes, 9 minutes. All right, y'all. I'm done talking at you. Questions? Do we want to start with Zoom just because sometimes it's harder for them to? It really depends on oh, sorry. Repeat the question. It was a question of if they have a small property, who's the right and best person to reach out to for assistance? It really depends on what the issue, what the needs, what the obstacles are. There's a lot of great resources out there. Of course, your master naturalists. If it's a wildlife issue, I'd go to Texas Parks and Wildlife. If it's a ranching or grazing issue, I might go to the Natural Resources Conservation Service. We talked about oak wilt earlier. I would go to the Texas A&M Forest Service. There's a ton of great resources out there. People who 5 days a week are out there just to help you. So depends on the issue, but yeah, or you can come talk to us. All right, let's transfer to the folks in the room. Questions, reactions. Yeah, so a lot of these agencies serve, I mean, really all of Texas. And so Texas A&M Forest Service, if you've got questions about your trees or oak wilt, just go to, I mean, Google search Texas A&M, find my forester, and they've got a pretty good website for how to find the forester just for you. Yes, ma'am. Yeah. So the question is, well, what if we don't have a bunch of great soil? What if it's already been washed away? Where do we go? Where do we start? Um, I had a slide that I just raced through focusing on start with the stressor. You know, why did all that soil wash away? Was it something during your lifetime that did it, or maybe it was for historical reasons? But I would start by thinking about what was the stressor on the land that led to that erosion. And assuming you can identify what that stressor was or is, I would start by managing that. I mean, it could be livestock, it could be vehicles, it could be the design of your road, it could be any number of things. But I would identify the stressors and see if you could manage them. And then from there, I would start with those simple strategies for slowing and sinking water. You know, the land needs time to heal, but that picture I showed earlier of that place in Bandera County, that was just, I don't know, 3-ish years after they had put those rocks out. So a lot of it depends on rain, but have patience and have faith and pray for rain. Um, other questions? Yes, sir, in the back. My work does not directly tie to trails. Um, but a trail, as with anything, you know, you're going to be disturbing soil. And so, yeah, you want to be really careful with where you are siting and building those trails. And there's actually a phenomenal, yes, I'm being a salesman again. If you flip to the back of that Hillside Stewardship Guide, there's a phenomenal resource in there from the Quivira Coalition. It's not on trails, but it's on ranch roads. And so it would be all the same concepts. for how do you build or maintain your roads, your trails in a way that meshes with the function and the flow of water across your land. So, sorry, did I repeat that question? Maybe not. Sorry, I'm getting in trouble. There was, I think, one more hand over here. Yes, sir. Do we have any other questions that I will try to repeat this time? When you say a ravine, do you mean sort of, do you mean a creek that only flows during rain events? Yes, sorry. Oh, wow. If you have a seasonal creek, an ephemeral creek that only flows when there's a rain event, yes, there are things you can do to slow down the water. It's hard to give a better answer without seeing it, but you can do things in the riparian area, so the habitat along the creek, and then yes, there are things you can do in the channel as well. Didn't touch on those, but yes is the short answer. Um, it's really tough to answer without seeing the property. But even with ponds, sorry, I didn't repeat the question. I'm failing. I'm failing tonight, y'all. It's not my best night. So yeah, the question was again, where and how can you slow water when you have creeks that only flow when there's rain? Going back to that diagram with the hillside, ideally you're slowing the water down before it washes down into that channel. Get it while it's still walking before it's, running down the hill. But yeah, there's things you can do on the hillside, in the riparian area, and even in the channel. But once that water gets to the channel, it is racing, and there are things you can do, but it's a heck of a lot tougher, a lot more work. Um, yeah, I can save me from lugging a box home. Yes, I would be happy to donate some or all of those to the chapter. Shoot, and I forgot to repeat the question. The question was, can we distribute physical copies? And the answer is yes. Save me a trip back to the office and you can have that box. Friends on Zoom. If you go to Hill Country Alliance, if you look up Hill Country Alliance Hillside Stewardship Guide, you should find it. And if you can't find it, send me an email right there and say, "Hey, I couldn't find it. What the heck?" And I will send it to you. All right. Thank you, everybody, for making the drive. I really appreciate your time and your stewardship. Thank you, thank you, thank you.